Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is The Amateur, where we're here just to talk life, hobbies, politics, ideologies, what have you. And on today's episode, we are talking about the day that will live in American history, June 24th, 2022, when the Supreme Court of the United States of America ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade. And also Planned Hood versus Casey. That's also under the, that was also overturned, but a lot of people don't just talk about Roe v. Wade being overruled. And I did take the liberty to read some of the 213-page paper that the Supreme Court pushed out. And again, I'm just an amateur, I'm not a professional in any way, shape, or form, so you're only going to get a little bit. So take, again, the things that I say with a grain of salt. But I did decide to read some of it just to kind of see what it read. And of the 213 pages, what it consists of is a slip opinion, which is pretty much, it gives just a summary of everything that they plan to talk about more in depth in the rest of the concurring opinion of the majority, and that's about 8 pages, and I would recommend just kind of reading that so you understand the language, and it really does lay it out everything. It's pretty much like an abstract, and it lays out everything that that the concurring opinion does. I believe Justice Thomas, Justice Roberts, and Justice Kavanaugh, they all wrote their own separate concurring opinions just to kind of give their little 2 cents and provide a little bit of nuance. And then the dissenters, which were primarily, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Breyer, they all put their names on a dissenting opinion that was also about 100 pages. And so I'm going to make a series of videos on this because I don't want the videos to be too long, but just to kind of talk about what this does and doesn't do, because you'll see a lot of TikTok videos and Twitter rants and things like that nature just kind of coming out and shouting and screaming.
For decades now, the Democrats have ran as being the party that will protect your abortion rights, your reproductive rights. And yet today, while they hold the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they were unable to stop an unelected body of fascists from stripping those rights from you. And they're not stopping there, because they immediately followed it up with, now we're going to go after same-sex marriage, same-sex sex, and also we're going to try to ban contraceptives in general because we are conservative fascists and we don't give a fuck about your opinions. The majority of the country is in favor of safe, legal abortion, and the Supreme Court said no, that is not in favor of the people. That's not democratic. We do not live in a democracy. We do not have rights anymore. They have stripped our workers' rights. They have stripped our healthcare from us. Healthcare is a right to people around the world, not in the United States of America, though. So we don't have that. Kids do not have the right to just go to school and get a honest and fair education and not have to worry about being fucking shot up. What is wrong with this sick country?
Hey, so today is for sure a national tragedy. If it's a national victory for you, I just wanted to let you know how happy I am for you that in your life you have familial support, financial stability, access to housing, access to food, access to transportation, access to good health care, access to maternal health care, access to a good hospital, access to transportation to get to that good hospital or get to those doctor's appointments, access to a career if you work that won't consider paying you less or firing you if you have pregnancy, maternal uterus needs, if you were to carry the pregnancy to term, access to adoption centers, access to education, and the list goes on infinitely. Access to childcare that is good and that you can afford while also working in a career that you have to have so that you can afford life in general. I'm really glad that you have that access. That must be really nice, and I truly am happy for you because it's an access that millions upon millions of people do not have and will never have. So leave a scripture in my comments for an immediate unfollow and blocking. Thank you.
You overturned Roe versus Wade, and the leader of the pack, Clarence Thomas, you handsy, good-for-nothing, sexual harassing motherfucker, you creep.
If you do not have a uterus, I need you to shut the fuck up or speak the fuck up.
But it's not entirely warranted. And again, I'll go through and just kind of read the highlights of the slip opinion and just kind of talk about it and see what this means for the rest of us. But without further ado, so just to start off, I don't know if you've seen in either Twitter, again on random different TikToks, libs of TikTok, whatever, but you'll see these things that pretty much saying that our democracy has now been completely destroyed. The Supreme Court has been compromised. The Supreme Court justices have lied under oath, and even then, like they never did.
Do I have this day an opinion, a personal opinion, on the outcome in Roe versus Wade? And my answer to you is that I do not.
Roe versus Wade is an important precedent of the Supreme Court.
A good judge will consider it as precedent, worthy as treatment of precedent, like any other.
It has been reaffirmed many times over the past 45 years.
Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never...
5 years.
Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never ceased, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled.
They never did, and they say that in the opinion, and I'll see if I can. I tried highlighting it somewhere, but I'll see if I can't find it. But they say all these things, and it's just demands for the Supreme Court to pretty much be abolished or disbanded. And I think it's important for us to understand what it is that the Supreme Court is supposed to do. And first things first is that they swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And so essentially what will happen with the Supreme Court being the highest law of the land, or the highest form of our judicial system, is that they will receive cases, and particularly the Supreme Court chooses which cases that they want to review, and they try to choose them if they believe that the ruling or the outcome may have some sort of implications for the rest of the country. But essentially what they're doing, though, is providing an opinion on whether the law that was enacted was constitutional, whether it was upheld by the Constitution based off what the Constitution enumerates, or if it does not. And so that's why we'll have things like Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education, and I'll speak on those a little bit later, especially when I get into Justice Thomas's his concurring opinion. But again, pretty much they're trying to review if something is upheld by the Constitution, more so explicitly than implicitly. So pretty much if you have to try to, which some conservative talking points will say it's written in invisible ink in the Constitution, then it's like not in the Constitution. So that's where when you see, especially of late, with the Supreme Court ruling that you have the right to bear arms, especially for the case that was in New York, and just how difficult it was for many law-abiding citizens to obtain a concealed carry permit in order to conceal carry a gun in public. And how that was unconstitutional because it is literally written in the Constitution, Second Amendment, you have the right to bear arms, whereas there's no amendment for the right to an abortion, like actually explicitly written. That'll be in my later video talking about the dissenters, closing off. But again, essentially, like that's kind of what the purpose of the Supreme Court is to do, and you want to have them avoid, like their job isn't to make the law. Their job isn't to, I think they call it judicial policy making, where essentially the things that the court does or doesn't decide ends up becoming the law, but that's not necessarily their job. Their job is to determine whether, at least the Supreme Court, is whether something was constitutional or unconstitutional. And then it's up to the legislatures and the executive branch to support what the Supreme Court decides, because they don't technically have to, because I mean the judicial system doesn't have any means to enforce, at least the Supreme Court doesn't have any means to actually enforce the things that they say. That's up to the Congress and the lawmakers. So essentially, like their job isn't necessarily to make the law. For the Supreme Court is whether to determine whether it's unconstitutional or not, and that'll go into the final piece. But just starting off with what this case was, that was brought to the Supreme Court's attention, it was Dobbs versus Jackson. Let me see what it says officially. Dobbs states health officer of the Mississippi Department of Health and others versus the Jackson Women's Health Organization and others. And so essentially what the case was is that you have the Mississippi Gestational Age Act, which prohibited abortions from occurring after 15 weeks of gestation. And mind you, 15 weeks of gestation is a little bit under 4 months of pregnancy. So we're past the third trimester. Most states in Europe, not most states, most countries in Europe, you're not even allowed to have an abortion after 12 weeks. Like, actually, it's like the legit first trimester. So like 12 weeks, you're typically like, that's their cutoff for abortion. So again, Europe, the European Union, other westernized countries are a lot more strict when it comes to the rules of abortion. This is a pretty lenient in comparison. However, the women, the organization, the Jackson's Women Health Organization, got together and they protested that this was unconstitutional. And it was actually in their own language that they demanded to the Supreme Court justice that they either needed to affirm Roe versus Wade or overrule Roe versus Wade. That was pretty much the ultimatum that organization gave, because they essentially said that if the Supreme Court upheld the Mississippi State's Gestational Age Act, that's a mouthful. If they upheld that as being constitutional, then you might as well overrule Roe versus Wade. And so, in the language of the personnel who were proposedly for Roe versus Wade, they kind of gave that ultimatum to the court. And so I will read verbatim what they have written. So again, you can see what it is. So what is held, and this is the majority opinion, 5-4, the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elective representatives. And what this will speak of, especially when you go more into Clarence Thomas's his concurring opinion, which I'll speak on in a later video, but essentially it's allowing the people to demand what they want for the area that they live in, and not having that overruled by the court unconstitutionally, which is what the issue was with Roe versus Wade, as well as with Planned versus Casey. And they speak a little more on this in their concurring opinion, and I can only read so much, and I would just, if you are actually interested in knowing what the language says and why it actually makes sense and why it doesn't necessarily for now mean the end to abortion. So then the other thing that the slip opinion will state, again, which is further clarified in the actual, like, the full report. So they mention stare decisis, which is essentially leaving the precedent as it's supposed to be. Let me see what it says specifically. So stare decisis is the doctrine that courts will adhere to precedent in making their decisions, and they state that that's it's good in some aspects but not good in others. Obviously, with something like Plessy versus Ferguson, if the court had gone with the doctrine of stare decisis, then we would still be segregated as a country, and so obviously it's not the law of the land, but it is a generally held practice so as to not have judges get into their own hubris of their own importance. But what they'll mention, and again, I'm only going to go into a summary of this, is they mention 5 factors as for the things to consider when deciding to overrule precedent. And so one of the things that they consider is the nature of the court's error. And for this, the nature of the error was that the court overstepped the democratic process. So really what this decision is saying in its most potent form is to give the power back to the people, not to the court, because the court, again, they're not the people that have been elected. They were appointed and they don't have term limits. And so you want to not have the court be the ones to make the law, because that's not necessarily what they do. That's the legislation. That's what Congress is for. That's what the House is for, the Senate is for, etc. Your lawmaking bodies. The second thing that they mentioned was the second reasoning was the quality of the reasoning. And essentially what the court found here is that the Roe and Casey conflated the right to shield information from disclosure, which is essentially the right to not incriminate yourself, which is actually found in the Fifth Amendment.
I plead the Fifth.
Was conflated with the right to privacy, a right of personal privacy, which isn't actually a right that's enumerated. And so it's saying conflated the right to shield information from disclosure and the right to make and implement important personal decisions without governmental interference, which is not quite the same thing, because obviously everyone's going to make personal decisions for themselves. Doesn't mean that they're all good or they're all can go without interference from the government. Like, so if someone says they want to steal something from a store and that was for themselves and it was their personal decision, but obviously the government needs to get involved with that decision that was made for themselves because it affected somebody else, etc. And that is the case with Planned Parenthood and just abortion in general, where there is someone else, and even in the language again of those pro-choicers and those that were for Roe versus Wade and for Casey, like even themselves, they admit that there is another entity, and they quote it as saying either it's potential life or it's unborn or the unborn human being, but there is something else that's also in the equation, and the courts note that, and they note that it's not necessarily their place to overstep those bounds. So the third reason, or the third factor that they look into for deciding whether to overrule a precedent is the workability, to which they say whether if you're able to how well you're able to impose or actually use the rule that's been decided by the precedent. And so Planned Parenthood versus Casey had actually overruled in part some aspects of Roe versus Wade, and one of those aspects was in determining that abortion, that states ought to allow abortion so that it does not cause undue burden on the woman or something along those lines. But essentially what the Supreme Court was saying is like, even that is not something that's really workable, like that it can't be applied in a consistent and predictable manner as far as what is due burden versus what's undue burden. The next thing, that the fourth factor is the effects on the other areas of law, and it was just determined that the regulation and how Roe was decided and the reasoning behind it kind of conflated to other pieces of legislature. And then lastly, the fifth factor is the reliance interest. So essentially saying that if overruling Casey does not uphold concrete reliance interest as far as with but essentially saying like if you overrule Casey, it's not going to affect other aspects of the rights that are enumerated in the Constitution. And then closing with the slip opinion, the final couple of paragraphs to the slip opinion are one saying that since abortion is not a fundamental right that is specifically enumerated within the Constitution, that it's something that goes to the states to regulate and legislate as their people wish for them to do. And then it closes off with saying Mississippi's Gestational Age Act is supported by the Mississippi legislator's specific findings, which include the state's asserted interest in protecting the life of the unborn. This legitimate interest provides a rational basis for the Gestational Act, and it follows that respondents' constitutional challenge must fail. And it says, closing off, that abortion presents a profound moral question. The Constitution does not prohibit the citizens of each state from regulating and prohibiting abortion. Roe and Casey arrogated that authority. The court overrules those decisions and returns that authority to the people and their elected representatives. Again, so what this is, all this is saying, for me personally, it doesn't do enough. I think, again, me personally, abortion just needs to be outright banned. On-demand abortion just needs to be outright banned. But essentially, just what this is saying is that your states are now able to regulate abortion as they see fit. And this is where you now get into companies saying, well, if you do want an abortion and your state doesn't offer it, then I will pay for you to go and your travel expenses to go elsewhere that will provide that service. Which, I mean, it is what it is at this point, but it's certainly not the end of the world. And I mean, you already see it as well that things like this are starting to spark other thought processes. And so here's just one TikTok video kind of explaining almost everything that I've always said when it comes to the options that women have to not be pregnant.
So I've had my tubes removed, and I had that done in 2019, and I'm going to tell you how I did it. This is the abridged version. I have much more detailed stuff on my personal playlist. First, you're going to Google child-free binder, and you're going to click this one, no regrets, no regrets. They have a free resource called Build a Binder, which gives you data, all this stuff, pages and pages of information. You can fill out about your health information and why you don't want children. Then you're going to go to the child-free subreddit. They have a list of doctors that is crowdsourced that have done these procedures before. You're going to find a doctor in your network, and you're going to go to the doctor with your binder. You're going to bully your doctor. You're going to tell them you value your financial freedom, that you do not want to have biological children of your own. Once you get approved by your doctor, you're going to call your insurance company because there's a chance this procedure is free. First, you're going to get the billing codes from your doctor of the procedures they're going to do. Then you're going to ask your insurance company, billing code by billing code, is this covered? Make note of when you had this conversation and who you talked to because your insurance company will likely try to fuck you over. Call ahead of surgery, double check, double confirm it's all covered. And then from there, it's really about choosing what you want. A lot of people get their tubes clamped or burned. This is reversible if you change your mind. I had what's known as a tubal salpingectomy, so they went in above my hip bones, took out my fallopian tubes, 2-week recovery time, don't regret a thing. I hope this helps you guys and stay safe.
So essentially, again, what she was proposing is to have your tubes tied, a tubal ligation, a partial, is it mastectomy? No, a hysterectomy. But again, like the things that I've said, but that being said, I'm a huge proponent of women's choice. And here are the options. Only do sex with your butt. Only do sex with your mouth. Get a hysterectomy. Get a tubal ligation. Take birth control. Choose and vet your partners wisely. Only have sex with men who wear condoms. Only have sex with infertile men. Only have sex with men who have vasectomies. Only have sex with a man who can guarantee that he will financially support and help raise a child if you have one, legally guaranteed through marriage. Or only have sex with a woman. But the only 100% preventable way of not getting STI or getting pregnant is abstinence. Don't have sex. Again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, but pretty much if you don't want to be pregnant, avoid the things that will get you pregnant, which is primarily vaginal sex and functional reproductive organs. So if you want to make sure that your reproductive organs are still functional, just don't participate in vaginal sex. You have oral sex, you have anal sex, you have dildos, you have digits, as far as fingers, literally anything but your vagina. But if you must use your vagina, really talking to women or men, like whatever, like men are, two are involved, are responsible for creating a child. You have vasectomies, partial or full, whatever. Again, vasectomies are supposed to be reversible, but either way, there's still some choices that affect yourself and not anyone else. You have, again, getting your tubes tied, having your ovaries removed, having your uterus removed, having your entire insides removed. I can't remember what the other thing is. Or even if you're not removing your uterus or anything, you're removing your eggs. I think I said that with the ovaries. Yeah. Obviously, and again, condoms, pills, like there's other things to prevent it. And then the freest and most cost effective and most the one that you have the most control over is abstinence, which is controlling yourself and controlling who you do or don't have sex with, and just not having sex if you're not ready to have a child. Makes sense to me. So those are just this is the initial summary of the decision of Dobbs versus Jackson that has overruled Roe v. Wade. And again, something as big as this, I don't want to say any because I'm sure there have been others, but a lot of the court decisions, especially when that overturns and overrules a big decision like Roe versus Wade, is going to be noteworthy in the history books. So those are just my initial takes on it and my initial understanding of that. Just let me know if that did or didn't make sense. Let me know what you think in the comments. How are you feeling about this law going into effect? Not the law really, but this ruling going into effect and giving the power back to the states. Make sure you leave a comment, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.